Jennifer Aniston rushed off the stage. Not toward the exit, not away from something. Toward the audience, down the 3 steps from the Tonight Show platform to the studio floor, in a direction that no guest had moved in the middle of a live taping in recent memory, her heels coming off on the 2nd step. One and then the other. Left behind on the stairs like evidence of a decision made faster than shoes allow. Jimmy Fallon stood behind his desk with both hands pressed flat against the surface and tears streaming down his face. Not trying to stop them, not turning away from the cameras, not performing anything. Just standing there, fully undone, watching Jennifer Aniston cross the studio floor toward the back of the audience, and 300 people parting around her like water around something that cannot be stopped. It was a Friday night taping. September 2019. The Tonight Show. Jennifer Aniston was the guest, promoting a new project. Here for the usual reasons, the kind of appearance her team had scheduled and managed and prepared for, with the practiced efficiency of people who have been doing this for 25 years. The audience had dressed up. They had arrived 2 hours early. When she walked onto that stage, she walked the way women walk who have learned, across decades of being watched, to make the walking itself say nothing you haven't chosen to say. Measured, warm, completely in command of every inch of the distance between the wing and the chair. The audience gave her everything they had. She gave it back. The interview had been easy and bright, full of the particular warmth she carried into rooms like a quality of light. And Jimmy had been loose beside her, and the band had been settled, and everything was exactly right. And then, from the back of the studio, a child began to sing. Not planned, not produced, not piped through speakers. A live voice, small and high, and slightly uncertain, the way children's voices are uncertain when they are singing from a real place rather than a performed one. Not loud, not practiced, just present. Just a song. 3 words of a song, actually, before the voice faltered and stopped. And the silence that followed was the kind of silence that falls when something real has entered a room that was prepared for something else entirely. Jennifer Aniston's head turned. Slowly, the way a head turns when the body recognizes something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Her eyes moved toward the back of the studio, past the cameras, past the standing audience members along the walls, into the area near the entrance where the studio ushers stood, and where, in a wheelchair beside the leftmost door, a woman of about 70 sat with a small girl of perhaps 8 years old standing at her knee. The girl had stopped singing. Her hand was over her mouth. Her grandmother's hand was on her shoulder. Jennifer Aniston looked at them for 3 full seconds. Then she stood up. Then she came off the stage. Jimmy Fallon did not move for a moment. Then his hands came up to his face. Then they came down. Then the tears came, and he stopped trying to manage them. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1994. Jennifer Aniston was not always Jennifer Aniston. She was not yet the woman whose face had been on more magazine covers than almost anyone alive. Not yet the person whose name had become a kind of cultural landmark, a fixed point that people used to locate themselves in time. I remember where I was when Friends started. I remember the first time I saw that haircut. I remember watching the finale in my college dormitory with 20 people I would never see again after graduation. In the spring of 1994, she was 25 years old, and she was waiting. She had done some television. She had done some small films. She had auditioned for things that had not gone her way. More things than she talked about later, a long accumulating list of rooms she had walked into and prepared for, and left without the thing she came for. She was not yet discouraged. Not exactly. She was in the particular state that exists just before a life changes, which feels, from the inside, identical to the state that exists just before nothing changes at all. She was living in a small apartment in Los Feliz at the time, on the second floor of a building with a courtyard that had a fountain that did not work. She was spending the money she had carefully and working the in-between jobs that actors work without complaint or apology, and she was going to auditions, and she was trying, with the discipline of someone who has decided that discipline is the only variable they can actually control, to stay ready. Her neighbor on the first floor was a woman named Carol Vasquez, who was 49 years old, and who had lived in that building for 11 years, and who had the specific, generous alertness of someone who notices things about people without making them feel observed. Carol worked at a school district administrative office 3 days a week and spent the other days caring for her mother, who was 81 and who lived in a room at the back of Carol's apartment with a window that faced the courtyard and the broken fountain. Carol brought Jennifer food sometimes, without announcement, leaving it outside her door, a container of soup, a piece of fruitcake at Christmas, once a full pot of something that smelled like every good thing that had ever happened in a kitchen. Jennifer had tried to pay her back in various ways. Carol had declined in various ways. They had arrived at an understanding, which was that Carol fed people because feeding people was how she understood love, and the correct response to love offered in that form was to receive it, without making it complicated. On a Tuesday afternoon in April, Jennifer came home from an audition that had not gone well, not catastrophically, just quietly. The kind of not going well that accumulates across months and years into a weight that lives in the chest. She sat on the floor of her apartment with her back against the couch and did not cry, because she was not quite at crying, and did not eat because she was not hungry, and did not call anyone, because she could not locate the version of herself that was capable of saying clearly what was wrong. Carol knocked on her door 20 minutes later, not because she knew. She had heard Jennifer come up the stairs. That was all, the particular rhythm of the footsteps, the length of time before the door closed, something in the quality of the quiet that followed. She came with 2 cups of coffee and sat on the floor beside Jennifer without being invited, the way people sit on floors beside each other when chairs would create too much formality for what is actually needed. She did not ask what happened. She said, "Tell me something good about today." Jennifer looked at her. She said, "There wasn't anything good about today." Carol said, "There was one thing. There is always one thing. Tell me that one." Jennifer thought about it for a long time. She said, the woman at the front desk of the casting office had a plant on her desk. It was a very healthy plant. Someone was taking good care of it. Carol said, "That's good. That's a real thing. Someone took care of something today." They sat on the floor and drank coffee, and Carol talked about her mother, who had that morning asked to hear a particular song she had not asked for in years, a song from her childhood in Guadalajara, and how Carol had found a recording of it on the radio and carried the radio into her mother's room, and her mother had closed her eyes and moved her lips along with it from beginning to end. Carol said, "She knew every single word. She hasn't spoken a clear sentence in 8 months, but she knew every word." Jennifer said, "How does that work?" Carol said, "Music lives in a different room than the rest of memory. Whatever closes the other doors doesn't close that one." They talked until it was dark outside. Jennifer went to bed that night not fixed, not transformed, but in possession of something small and solid that she had not had before. The knowledge that on a Tuesday in April, when nothing had gone right, a woman downstairs had heard her come up the stairs and brought coffee and asked her to find the one good thing. She carried that. She carried it in the specific way that small acts of precision carry, not loudly, not with drama, but persistently, in the back of the mind. And the place where the things that actually sustain you live alongside the things that shaped you. 3 months later, in July 1994, Jennifer Aniston was cast as Rachel Grain in a new ensemble sitcom called Friends. The rest of it is the rest of it. The decade on that stage. The 6 people, and the couch, and the coffee, and the laugh track. The 100 million viewers. The show that became a kind of shared furniture of American life that people carried with them when they moved and unpacked in new cities and new apartments with courtyards and broken fountains and neighbors they did not yet know. She did not forget Carol Vasquez. She did not forget the floor, or the coffee, or the one good thing. She sent Carol tickets to the Friends finale taping in 2004. Carol came with her daughter. Jennifer had arranged for them to be brought backstage afterward. They had stood in the empty set, the apartment, the orange couch, the kitchen where 10 years of fictional life had been lived in front of cameras, and Carol had run her hand along the countertop without speaking for a moment, and then said, "Someone took good care of this." Carol Vasquez had moved from Los Feliz in 2009 when her own health had made the stairs difficult. She moved to a smaller place in Glendale, closer to her daughter's family. Her daughter, Maria, had a daughter of her own by then, a girl named Sophia, born in 2011, who grew up the way children grow up when they live close to a grandmother who has music in the apartment at all hours, and who believes that the correct response to difficulty is to find the one good thing. Sophia was 8 years old in the summer of 2019 when Carol's health entered a new and more serious chapter, the kind that changes the arithmetic of time in ways that cannot be managed, only accepted. Sophia had taken to singing to her grandmother in the evenings, not performing, not showing off, just sitting on the edge of the bed and singing whatever came to her, the way children sing when no one has yet told them there is a reason to be self-conscious about it. The song she sang most often, without knowing why, the song that came when she was sitting beside her grandmother and looking for something to offer, was the theme from Friends. Not because she watched the show. She was 8. She knew it the way children know things that float in the air of a household, absorbed without intention, without context, simply present because someone somewhere loved it enough that it became part of the atmosphere of a home. Carol had heard the song in Sophia's voice and closed her eyes and moved her lips along with it, the way she had once watched her own mother do with a song from Guadalajara played on a radio carried down a hallway. Maria had contacted The Tonight Show in August 2019. She had written carefully, not asking for much, only to bring her mother and her daughter to a taping, to be in the room, to let Carol be somewhere that connected the thread from that Tuesday in April in 1994 to whatever came after. She had not told them the story. She had told them only that her mother was not well, and that this would mean a great deal. The Tonight Show had arranged accessible seating near the entrance. Jennifer Aniston had not been told. No one had been told. Maria had dressed Sophia in her best dress. She had brought Carol in the wheelchair and stood beside her and told her where they were. Carol had looked at the stage from the back of the studio and said, quietly, "Someone takes good care of this place." Behind the scenes, nothing had been arranged. There was no segment. There was no producer with a microphone and a story package. There was only a woman in a wheelchair near the entrance door and a small girl standing at her knee who, at a particular moment in the taping, had begun to sing the only song she knew to sing when she was sitting beside her grandmother and wanting to give her something. Now, in the present, Jennifer Aniston was crossing the studio floor in bare feet. Her heels left on the stairs, and 300 people were watching her move through the parting crowd toward the back of the room. Toward the wheelchair and the small girl, and the woman who had once sat on a floor and asked a 25-year-old to find the one good thing. She reached Carol Vasquez and crouched down in front of the wheelchair, both hands going to Carol's hands, and she stayed there for a long moment without speaking. Carol looked at her. She said, in a voice that was quieter and slower than it had once been, but entirely precise, "I heard you coming up the stairs." Jennifer Aniston's face broke open completely. She said, "You always heard me coming up the stairs." Carol said, "I always heard you." Sophia stood at her grandmother's knee with her hand over her mouth and her eyes very wide, and Maria stood behind the wheelchair with one hand on her mother's shoulder and the other pressed flat against her own sternum, holding something in. Jimmy Fallon had come down from the stage. He was standing 10 feet back, not approaching, giving the distance its proper space, tears still moving down his face without apology. The band sat motionless. The director in the control room let the cameras find what they needed to find and said nothing into the headset. 300 people stood in the specific silence of witnessing something that had not been built for them, something that was happening in the room they were in, but was not, in any essential way, for them, an understanding that this was a privilege, not an exclusion. But this is the moment no one in that studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Jennifer Aniston looked at Sophia. The girl had not moved. She was still standing with her hand over her mouth, as if she might sing again by accident if she uncovered it. Jennifer looked at her for a moment, and then said, gently, "Don't stop. Will you finish it?" The girl looked at her grandmother. Carol's hand found Sophia's and held it. Sophia sang the rest of the song, small and high and slightly uncertain, the way children's voices are when they are singing from a real place, all the way to the end, in a silent arena full of strangers. For her grandmother, with Jennifer Aniston crouched on the floor in bare feet holding Carol's hands and not saying a word. When Sophia finished, she looked at her shoes. Then she looked up. Jennifer said, "Your grandmother taught you that, not the song. How to do that." Sophia looked at Carol. She said, "She says there is always one good thing." Jennifer Aniston looked at Carol Vasquez and said, "She's right. She has always been right. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." Carol Vasquez passed away in March 2020, at home in Glendale, in her own bed, with Maria beside her and Sophia asleep in the next room. It was early morning. The fountain in the courtyard of the building, which had not worked in years, had been repaired the previous autumn by a neighbor who thought it would please her. She had sat beside it in October and listened to the water for an hour. She said it sounded like something beginning. Sophia is 13 now. She sings in her school choir. She is not the best voice in the room, which does not concern her in the slightest, because her grandmother spent enough years sitting beside her that she understands something many singers twice her age do not, that the point of the singing is not the singing. The point is what you are giving to the person you are singing to, and whether you mean it, and whether you stay until the end. Jennifer Aniston keeps a photograph on the desk in her home, not a professional photograph, not a magazine cover, not anything from the decades of everything that came after that apartment in Los Feliz. A photograph Maria sent her the week after the taping, taken on Maria's phone that night in the studio. Carol in the wheelchair. Sophia standing at her knee. Jennifer crouched on the floor in bare feet. All three of them connected by hands, in the back of a room full of strangers who had the grace to stay quiet. Below the photograph, in Jennifer's own handwriting on a small card, 3 words. One good thing. Some people come into your life through the front door, and some come through a knock when you are sitting on the floor not quite crying. And the ones who knock are the ones you carry forward through every room that comes after, all the way to the end. all the way to the back of a studio in September on a Friday night, when a child begins to sing, and suddenly there is nowhere else in the world you need to be.